Rejection hurts, not because it destroys you, but because it challenges the story you told yourself. You thought this would work. You thought they would choose you. You thought now was finally your time. And when it didn't happen, your mind started negotiating, blaming, replaying. This message is for that moment. The moment you stop fighting reality and start becoming stronger. Rejection is information, not a verdict. Most people hear rejection and immediately translate it into a judgment about their worth, their intelligence, their potential, or their future. That interpretation feels automatic, but it's deeply inaccurate. A verdict implies finality, moral judgment, and a closed case. Rejection doesn't offer any of that. It simply presents data. Something didn't align in that moment. Skills, timing, expectations, values, readiness, or circumstances you may never fully see. When you confuse information with condemnation, you hand your power to an event that was never meant to define you. Information is neutral, even when it's uncomfortable. It doesn't insult you or praise you. It just tells you what happened. Rejection shows you where reality currently stands, not where it must always remain. It reveals boundaries, what was required, what was missing, what wasn't wanted, or what couldn't be sustained. When you treat rejection as information, you stop personalizing it and start observing it. You shift from emotional reaction to analysis, and that shift alone creates stability. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you begin asking, "What does this tell me about the situation?" That question opens space for clarity rather than shame. Most people suffer because they argue with the information. They replay conversations, imagine better versions of themselves, or wait for validation that never arrives. They want rejection to be unfair so they don't have to look at it closely. But information ignored doesn't disappear, it just repeats itself in different forms. When you accept rejection as data, you give yourself the chance to refine your approach. You see patterns. You notice where effort was misplaced or where standards were unclear. You recognize whether the rejection points to a skill gap, a mismatch, or a direction that was never yours to begin with. Treating rejection as a verdict freezes you. Treating it as information moves you forward. A verdict closes identity. This is who I am. Information updates strategy. This is what didn't work. One traps you in self-judgment. The other invites growth. Strength doesn't come from never being rejected. It comes from staying mentally flexible when rejection appears. When you extract the lesson without absorbing the shame, you remain intact. You stay grounded, responsive, and capable of adjusting without losing your sense of self. Rejection, when viewed clearly, is one of the fastest teachers available. It cuts through fantasy and exposes reality without negotiation. It doesn't promise comfort, but it offers precision. Those who grow are not the ones who avoid rejection, but the ones who learn to read it accurately without turning it into a story about their value or their limits. Resistance to reality creates unnecessary suffering because it places your mind in direct conflict with what already exists. Reality does not negotiate, explain itself, or reverse course to accommodate emotional comfort. When something happens, rejection, loss, failure, change, it has already happened. The pain often isn't caused by the event itself, but by the internal struggle against accepting it. The mind insists things should be different, replays alternate outcomes, and clings to expectations that no longer match the present moment. That tension between what is and what you want it to be becomes a constant source of stress, draining energy that could otherwise be used for adaptation and growth. Resistance often disguises itself as strength, but it's usually fear in a more socially acceptable form. People say they're not giving up, when in reality, they're refusing to acknowledge a boundary that has already been made clear. They argue with outcomes as if persistence alone can undo facts. This kind of resistance keeps you stuck in emotional loops, anger, resentment, bitterness, confusion, because it demands control over something that can't be controlled. The more you resist, the more rigid you become, and rigidity breaks under pressure. Flexibility, not force, is what allows a person to stay stable when circumstances change. When you accept reality, you're not approving of it. You're recognizing it accurately. Acceptance removes the extra layer of suffering created by denial and self-deception. It allows you to respond instead of react. The moment you stop fighting reality, your nervous system begins to settle because the internal conflict ends. You no longer waste energy proving something shouldn't be happening, and instead you regain the ability to choose your next move. Acceptance is not passive resignation. It's clear-eyed acknowledgement of the present conditions so intelligent action becomes possible. Unnecessary suffering thrives in imagined alternatives. People torture themselves with thoughts of how things could have gone, what they should have said, or who they might have been if circumstances were different. These thoughts feel productive, but they don't change anything. They only prolong pain. Reality doesn't punish you for making mistakes. It simply shows you the results. Resistance turns that neutral feedback into self-inflicted harm. When you stop resisting, you stop feeding the suffering. You see the situation as it is, stripped of drama and personal interpretation, and that clarity creates emotional space. Living without resistance doesn't make life easy, but it makes it honest. It replaces internal warfare with grounded awareness. When you align with reality instead of opposing it, you conserve strength, sharpen judgment, and reduce suffering that was never required in the first place. Acceptance restores personal power and clarity because it ends the internal struggle that drains your attention and strength. When you refuse to accept what is happening, your energy gets trapped in resistance, replaying events, defending your ego, or waiting for circumstances to change on their own. That mental friction weakens your ability to think clearly. Acceptance cuts through that noise. It grounds you in the present reality, where your actual choices exist. Power doesn't come from controlling outcomes. It comes from responding accurately to the conditions in front of you. Clarity emerges the moment you stop arguing with reality. When emotions are no longer fueled by denial, the mind becomes more precise. You begin to see what is within your control and what is not. That distinction is crucial. Without acceptance, everything feels personal and overwhelming. With acceptance, situations become structured and understandable. You can separate facts from assumptions, lessons from self-blame. This clarity allows you to make deliberate decisions instead of reactive ones, and deliberate decisions are where real agency lives. Acceptance also dismantles the illusion that refusing reality keeps options open. In truth, denial narrows your choices because it prevents movement. When you accept a loss, a rejection, or a failure, you stop waiting for permission to move forward. You reclaim the ability to adapt. Acceptance does not mean you like what happened. It means you no longer let it dictate your emotional state. That emotional independence is a form of power. It prevents circumstances from hijacking your identity or your direction. Personal power grows when you stop outsourcing your stability to external outcomes. Acceptance returns responsibility to where it belongs, your response. Instead of asking why something happened to you, you begin asking how you will deal with it. That shift restores dignity. It transforms you from a passive recipient of events into an active participant in your own life. You don't waste energy fighting the past. You invest it in shaping what comes next. Clarity deepens as acceptance removes distortions created by fear and ego. When you accept reality, you stop needing it to validate you. You see people, situations, and yourself more accurately. That honesty strengthens judgment and builds trust in your own perception. With acceptance, your mind is no longer clouded by resentment or false hope. You stand on solid ground, able to assess risks, set boundaries, and choose direction without emotional fog. Acceptance restores power not by making you invincible, but by making you steady. It gives you access to your full awareness and strength in the present moment, where meaningful action is possible. Rejection often protects you from the wrong path, even though it rarely feels that way in the moment. When something is taken away or denied, the immediate reaction is to assume loss, failure, or personal deficiency. But many paths look promising only because their consequences are still hidden. Rejection interrupts momentum before commitment deepens, before identity becomes entangled, and before the cost of staying grows heavier. What feels like exclusion is sometimes a quiet form of redirection, steering you away from situations that would have required you to shrink, compromise, or endure long-term misalignment. Not every opportunity is an upgrade, and not every door is meant to be entered. Some paths demand sacrifices that aren't visible at the start: constant self-betrayal, chronic stress, dependence on unstable approval, or the slow erosion of self-respect. Rejection can block access to environments that reward the wrong traits or punish your strengths. When you are denied entry, you are spared the gradual damage of forcing yourself to belong where you don't fit. Protection doesn't always arrive gently. Sometimes it arrives as disappointment that prevents deeper harm. Rejection also reveals incompatibility before it becomes entrapment. Whether it's a career, a relationship, or a personal ambition, early rejection can save years of effort invested in the wrong direction. People often romanticize perseverance without considering context. Persisting in the wrong place doesn't build character. It builds resentment. Rejection exposes limits and boundaries that would have eventually surfaced through conflict, burnout, or collapse. By ending something early, it preserves resources you would have spent trying to make something work that was never sustainable. There is also protection in being forced to reevaluate. Rejection breaks the illusion that a single path is the only path. It disrupts attachment to an outcome and creates space for alternatives that may align more closely with who you are becoming. Without rejection, people often settle into lives they didn't consciously choose, simply because no obstacle forced them to question direction. Rejection can act as a pause, compelling you to ask whether what you wanted was truly right for you or merely familiar, impressive, or externally rewarded. The mind resists this interpretation because it prefers certainty, even when certainty leads in the wrong direction. But growth requires discernment, not just desire. Rejection sharpens that discernment. It prevents premature commitment and exposes paths that look appealing but demand the wrong price. What you lose in the moment may be protection from a future that would have cost you far more than you realized. Growth begins when ego steps aside, because ego is primarily concerned with protection, not progress. Its job is to defend identity, preserve self-image, and avoid anything that feels like threat or humiliation. While that instinct can be useful in moments of real danger, it becomes a barrier when applied to learning and development. Ego resists feedback, reframes mistakes as injustices, and searches for external blame to maintain a sense of superiority or innocence. As long as ego dominates, growth is limited because growth requires exposure to error, uncertainty, and discomfort. When ego is in control, every challenge feels personal. Criticism becomes an attack, failure becomes a verdict, and rejection becomes an insult. This creates a defensive posture that prioritizes appearing capable over becoming capable. People protect their pride by staying within what they already know, repeating familiar patterns, and avoiding situations where their weaknesses might be revealed. That avoidance feels safe, but it quietly caps potential. Ego prefers stability over improvement, even when stability leads to stagnation. Stepping aside from ego doesn't mean losing confidence. It means redefining it. Real confidence isn't built on being right all the time, but on being able to adapt when you're wrong. When ego loosens its grip, curiosity replaces defensiveness. You begin to observe your own behavior without needing to justify it. Mistakes become sources of information instead of sources of shame. This shift allows learning to occur because the mind is no longer busy protecting an image. It's focused on understanding reality. Growth accelerates when you allow yourself to be a beginner again. Ego hates that position because it involves admitting gaps in knowledge and competence. But every meaningful skill, insight, or transformation requires a phase of incompetence. When ego steps aside, you can ask better questions, receive guidance without resentment, and experiment without fear of looking foolish. That openness creates momentum. Progress becomes measurable, not performative. Ego also narrows perspective by tying identity to outcomes. Success becomes proof of worth, and failure becomes evidence of inadequacy. This makes every effort emotionally risky and every setback disproportionately painful. When ego steps aside, effort is separated from identity. You can work hard without needing the outcome to validate you. That emotional separation increases resilience because setbacks no longer threaten your sense of self. They simply signal adjustment. True growth demands honesty, and honesty is incompatible with ego's need to appear flawless. When ego steps aside, you see yourself more accurately, including limitations and potential. That clarity creates room for deliberate change. Growth begins not when you feel superior, but when you become willing to see what is actually there and respond without distortion. Strength is built by facing discomfort calmly, not by avoiding it or overpowering it through force. Discomfort is an unavoidable part of growth, change, and responsibility, yet most people treat it as a signal to escape. When discomfort appears, the instinct is to distract, react emotionally, or seek immediate relief. That reaction reinforces fragility. Calmly facing discomfort trains the nervous system to remain steady under pressure, and steadiness is the foundation of real strength. Strength is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, controlled, and consistent in the presence of challenge. Calm does not mean numbness or indifference. It means allowing discomfort to exist without letting it dictate behavior. When you stay calm, you create space between sensation and action. That space is where discipline lives. Instead of being pushed around by impulses, you choose your response deliberately. Each time you do this, you build trust in your ability to handle difficulty without collapsing or lashing out. Over time, discomfort loses its power to intimidate because you have proven to yourself that you can remain composed while it passes through. Facing discomfort calmly also sharpens perception. When panic or resistance takes over, thinking becomes narrow and reactive. Calm attention, on the other hand, allows you to observe what the discomfort is actually demanding of you. Is it asking for endurance, adjustment, learning, or restraint? Many challenges feel overwhelming only because they are met with emotional resistance. When you remain calm, problems become more manageable, and solutions become visible. Strength grows through this repeated practice of meeting difficulty with clarity rather than chaos. There is a cumulative effect to calm exposure. Each time you willingly stay present with discomfort, you increase your tolerance for future challenges. What once felt unbearable becomes familiar. This doesn't harden you in a brittle way, it stabilizes you. You become less reactive, less defensive, and more capable of sustained effort. Calm endurance builds internal structure. It teaches patience, restraint, and confidence rooted in experience rather than hope. Avoidance may offer temporary comfort, but it weakens long-term capacity. Every avoided discomfort reinforces the belief that you cannot handle it. Calm engagement does the opposite. It rewires self-perception. You begin to see yourself as someone who can withstand pressure without losing control. That self-trust becomes a source of strength that carries into every area of life, from relationships to work to personal discipline. Strength built this way is reliable. It does not depend on mood, motivation, or external validation. It is forged through repeated moments of calm presence in the face of discomfort, where composure is chosen over escape and resilience is built through quiet persistence. Accept what is, learn what it teaches, move forward without resentment or fear. That's how strength becomes permanent.